the non-denominational is not it should not be in the Protestant bucket anymore. And you've even admitted that we do follow the solas. But I want to give you just this time and freedom to give your best sales pitch about why maybe it should be in a different bucket, and it doesn't quite follow Protestantism to its full capacity, and it's actually drawing more confusion than it's actually helping the Protestant movement.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I think really we need to think of a solid definition of Protestant. That needs to be the starting place. A lot of people think Protestant is just this miscellaneous category of any church that calls itself Christian that's like not Catholic or Orthodox. But that's kind of meaningless. A category that's defined by a negative quality could have infinite elements to it. So if I start a cult in my basement, is that Protestant? Mormonism, is that Protestant? Jehovah's Witness, is that Protestant? The weird South Korean God the Mother cult that appears on your college campuses, is that Protestant? So if Protestantism can include absolutely anything, if it's just a negative category of not Catholic or Orthodox, then it's pointless to even talk about. It's pointless to even talk about Protestantism. So if that's how you define it, then it doesn't mean anything to say there's 40,000 Protestant denominations if you're defining Protestant as just this miscellaneous category. My response to that is there's 40,000 Chalcedonian denominations because there's one Miaphysite denomination, the Oriental Orthodox, and they barely ever split. But there's 40,000 Chalcedonian denominations. That includes the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics and the Protestants. So yeah, if a category is just a negative thing, it's meaningless. Now, some people might say, okay, maybe let's define Protestantism as the 5 solas. So any church that adheres to the 5 solas is Protestant. But the thing is, where are you getting that from? Where are you getting this idea that the 5 solas defines Protestantism? Because the 5 solas as like this set of things didn't exist until the 20th century. Like, yeah, during the Reformation, people believed in sola scriptura and sola fide. There was really 2 solas. Like, who's going to disagree with soli deo gloria? Like, no, I don't think we should glorify God. Like, seriously, I feel like that was just added to the end of the list to sound cool. So, no, the 5 solas historically did not define Protestantism. So what defines Protestantism? Well, it ain't rocket surgery. What defines Protestantism is the Protestant Reformation, where a bunch of Catholics in the Catholic Church protested the leadership of the Catholic Church, and for protesting the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church, these Catholics were forcibly kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. So then you had a bunch of Catholics who were outside of the Roman Catholic Church for protesting the Roman Catholic Church, and that's how they got the name Protestant. So Protestants are Catholics in protest of the Pope. It makes no sense to call someone a Protestant if they're not rooted in the Catholic Church. Otherwise, what are you protesting? It's not like some random guy who starts a church in his basement can be like, I'm protesting the Pope. Okay, if this protesting the Pope just means you don't agree with the Pope, okay. Are Sikh mystics in Tibet, are they protesting the Pope? Are they Protestant now? Like, guess what? I protest the Dalai Lama because I don't agree with him. So yeah, the best way to understand why non-denominationals aren't Protestant is to realize that any definition of Protestant that includes them is literally meaningless. So what I would say is Protestantism is a historical category, not a theological category. And I think the biggest error of evangelicalism is defining Christianity as purely propositional rather than participatory. That's why evangelicals who convert to like more high church Protestantism will say, oh, I'm a Lutheran today. Not because I go to a Lutheran church, because I agree with Lutheran ideas. It's like, that doesn't make you Lutheran. If I decide I believe in transubstantiation purgatory, that doesn't automatically make me a Roman Catholic. So Protestantism is not a set of ideas. Protestantism is a set of institutions that formed out of a specific historical moment. So I have a historical definition of Protestant, not a theological definition of Protestant. So if it doesn't make sense, it's not fair to compare Catholics to Protestants if you're defining Catholicism as an institution and Protestantism as a set of vaguely defined ideas. Then you're comparing apples and oranges. The only way to have any meaningful dialogue between Catholics and Protestants is if they both have a historical institutional definition. So I would say a Protestant church is an institution with roots in the Protestant Reformation. That includes Presbyterians, that includes Lutherans, that includes the Dutch Reformed, that includes some Baptists. There are some Baptists that are from the Church of England, and there's a lot of Baptists that just spawn out of nowhere. So with Baptists, it's hard. So I'd say like mainline American Baptists, even traditional Southern Baptists, can be considered Protestant. Random Billy Bob's Independent Bible Baptist Church that formed out of nowhere in Idaho, no, that's not Protestant. So a lot of non-denominational churches will have Baptist theology, and they'll say, okay, why can't we be Baptist? If we have, the thing is, it's not just theology that defines a category. It's also history and institutions. Because if you're defining Catholicism by an institution and Protestantism as a set of vague ideas, again, you're comparing apples to and oranges. Then it makes no sense to criticize Protestantism if Protestantism could include absolutely anything. So that's what I would say. That's why I'd say non-denominationals aren't Protestant. That's just the first reason. I gave you the historical reason. Now there's some theological reasons. Because there are some core beliefs that basically everyone in the Reformation held to, that basically no non-denominationals hold to. The first belief is the belief that the sacraments actually save you. Even traditional Baptists sort of believed this, that baptism is not just a symbol. Communion is not just a symbol. God works real grace through these things, and they are ordinarily necessary for salvation. They're normatively necessary for salvation. Not absolutely necessary, because they're like, what about the thief on the cross? Not absolutely necessary. Normatively necessary for salvation. So what the reformers would always say is it's not the want of sacraments, but the condemnation of sacraments that damns you. So if you just don't have an opportunity to get baptized or receive the Lord's Supper, you're not damned for that. But if you actually reject baptism and reject the Lord's Supper consciously, there is no way you have saving faith. That's what the reformers would say. It's completely compatible with justification by faith alone. So that's one thing that really separates Protestants from non-denominational churches. And some person will say, oh, my non-denominational church believes in the sacraments. And if you investigate their case, what they mean is I believe in the sacraments because I watched a Lutheran video and my pastor has no idea what a sacrament is. That's usually what it means. The second thing is that Protestantism saw itself as the Catholic Church reformed by the Bible. So they still had a very institutional definition of the church. And like I said, they still believed voluntary schism is wrong. So they didn't have this concept of the church the way evangelicals do, where you can start a new church for any reason whatsoever. And as long as you're vaguely following your personal interpretation of the Bible, it's perfectly valid. So when people criticize Protestantism, they're really criticizing evangelicalism. So I would define Protestantism as institutions rooted in the Catholic Church that are reformed by the Bible that don't see the Roman magisterium as infallible. Whereas evangelicalism is the idea that denominations don't matter. So if someone thinks denominations don't matter, if a specific church doesn't really care what denomination it's part of, or doesn't even try to be in a denomination, that's not Protestantism, that's evangelicalism. Evangelicalism is this free-for-all Christianity that all of Protestantism gets labeled with. So yeah, those are basically the theological and historical reasons why there's absolutely no coherent definition that would include non-denominationals as Protestant.
Yeah. One of these things are not like the other, right? And yeah, I mean, obviously, I go to a non-denominational church that is bent Southern Baptist, and so I went to SBC, so our SBTS, and I would consider myself Southern Baptist. And they are part of the convention, but they determined that they're non-denominational. And I'm starting to really believe that you can't just make up all of your own definitions and try to term yourself, but no one around you looks the same as you or has anything to do with the way that you are constructing it. It doesn't look like anything in church history. It doesn't look like anything like the main lines. And somewhere, maybe you can help me with the history on this, but I keep tracking back to about the 1960s, 1950s of a sect of the American Christian world determined that they did not want to look like the mainline Protestant churches, and they wanted to separate and create something different.
Yes.
How could you have that vision, and how could you have that sentiment of we do not want this to look like church? We want it to somewhat look like culture. We want to go into culture, and what I keep coming back to is the Jesus movement. But we want to we want to allow the culture to kind of come in and feel comfortable and do its own thing. And we want to not have accountability towards any of the main lines. We want to somewhat come up with our own theology. We want to instill our own pastors. We want to have no kind of what you said magisterium, not an infallible magisterium, but somewhat of an institutional structure in which if things are wrong, if you can call foul on something, you have an institution that can do that. But you have all of these separate churches that have completely their own structures, completely their own institutions. You have these mega church pastors who are going wild and don't have to be accountable to anyone. How could you also say, I want that? I want no accountability. I want no magisterium. I want to be able to completely do my own thing and not have to study church history whatsoever and come up with a completely new worship that has never been seen before. But I also want to be called Protestant. It's
Right.
like it's like moving to Canada and completely creating your own civilization and then saying, hey, I still want to be American. It's like, well, I don't know if that's how it works though, because it doesn't look
Right.
anything like America.
Right. Yeah. If you're just defining Protestant as not Catholic, so it's not like the evangelicals are descended like literally physically from the Anabaptists, but they have the same ideas as the Anabaptists. And the Protestant reformers all strongly condemned Anabaptists more strongly than they condemned the Catholics, by the way. They considered Anabaptists more heretical than Catholics. So for exactly the same reasons, everything the reformers condemned the Anabaptists for are things that characterize all of evangelicalism, such as not believing the sacraments, having a free-for-all church structure. And by the way, congregationalism shouldn't be confused with a free-for-all church structure. Congregationalism is where the local church is autonomous, but they still often fellowship with each other. So like the United Church of Christ is a congregationalist denomination. It's not a free-for-all. So yeah, the Anabaptists had free-for-all Christianity. They often had a lot of enthusiasm where there were these large emotional movements that would rally up crowds that weren't really based in anything historic. They often did deny a lot of historic theology. There was a lot of Nestorianism among the Anabaptists who didn't really believe Mary was the mother of God. And obviously, there was the whole infant baptism thing. The traditional Baptists out of the Church of England, they're making every effort to try and say we are not like those Anabaptists. We are just like radical nonconformist Congregationalists. And to some extent, there is a difference. So I would say a traditional Northern Baptist church from Rhode Island that founded Brown University, I would say, yeah, that's more of a traditional Baptist church. They're not Anabaptists. But your average like Bible believing Southern Baptist, not even Southern Baptist, your average independent fundamental Baptist church in the middle of Arkansas, like yeah, that's Anabaptist. Okay, that is not Protestant. So you're absolutely right, and you're right about the Jesus People movement and the Calvary Chapel, which was formed out of that. It was specifically trying to create a brand new church that doesn't feel like church to appeal to hippies from California. I've met evangelicals who will staunchly defend this. They're like, shouldn't we reach all people? Yeah, but you don't change the church to reach
Church, yeah.
people. If I'm trying to, like, that's kind of like a flip side of what the mainlines do, saying, oh, we need to make the church more gay to appeal to the gay community. Like, no, you should reach out to all communities. You should be present in all communities. You shouldn't like isolate yourself from the communities. That doesn't mean you change the liturgy to appeal to different communities. So that is completely unjustifiable, and it kind of vindicates what I've been saying, because it is a self-conscious new form of church. It is self-consciously a rebellion against the institutional mainline Protestantism.
Yeah. And your interview with Matthew Everhard opened me up to kind of terming a lot of this stuff. And then I read Worshiptainment, and it has just pushed this conversation even farther. And I think non-denominationalism in kind of the seeker sense of movement has to come to terms with, we've never had a church that looks like this. And so you have to come to a conclusion of, why did we decide this? And if you look, basically you have two choices. You either look into church history and try to come up with a liturgy that is like it looks like our founding fathers and what they have established, or you see the new church and you say, well, it kind of looks more like the world. And you better have a really good reason why you made a new church that looks like the world, rather than trying to comprehend why you would just uproot the traditional, what we've decided on for 2,000 years. Like, it makes no sense. And